When looking back at the 1950s, 40 Anderson left his legacy on the bench. On the court, the era was defined by a guy who could only be described as the greatest gift MSU has ever received.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and I didn't go out for the high school team. I was too small, really. I was only 6 feet tall when I graduated from high school. But I did play in the YMCA leagues, or Linden Center, the youth leagues, and that's where I really started.
Long before he was dubbed Jumpin' Johnny, John Green was still trying to find his way in the game of basketball. Without a high school experience to fall back on, Green did most of his growing up on and off the court as a member of the United States Marine Corps. It was here, as a 20-year-old, that Green spurted to 6'5" and learned the fundamentals of playing as a team.
It was overseas in Japan, and we had a tremendous record there. We had 38-1, and our competition was really, even though it was overseas in Japan, was against other, American players, the base teams that were over there in that area, in the Stars and Stripe area.
I had talked to a friend of mine, a football coach in Korea, and said, there's a guy here in the Marines that is a super leaper, and you ought to look into it. At which I answered him and said, when he gets out, have him look me up.
It wasn't long after that John Green had his first encounter with his future head coach.
I remember first meeting him and walking into his office and everything, and I told him I wanted to come out for the team, and he said, well, I was in service at the time and I was on leave, and he said, well, why don't you come back when you get out of service?
January 2nd, 1956, he did come back, and the legend of Jumpin' Johnny Green was born.
I came back from Illinois one day. We lost the game. I was very mad, and I told the team to get down and practice. The secretary said, there's some guy in there that wants to see you. It was Johnny Green.
Well, I'm back, and he didn't even remember me. And so he said, well,
have you filled out your form? He said, I filled out my forms. Have you registered? I've registered. I got my books. When do I go to practice? So I said, well, go on up with Bob Stevens, my assistant coach, and let me finish practice.
We were practicing on the basketball court where the freshmen would practice. And, there was a net that separated, the gymnastic team would be practicing on one side of the court, the basketball court's on the other side. And there was a net with a wire that the net was hanging on. And I don't know, for whatever the reason, we just kind of started seeing who could touch, that wire.
In fact, I was over at East Lansing High School doing an interview one day, and the basketball manager at East Lansing High School came in. And he said, hey, I've just been over to Michigan State's basketball practice. You should see this guy that's just coming here to play basketball. He says he can jump right up to the ceiling. And I said, oh, he says, yeah, the guy's name, Green, I think. He said, Jim Green, John, one of those names.
And I went down to practice, and I was very mad at my team.
And the rule at Michigan State was you only interrupted varsity practice if 40's mother died. That's how serious he was about basketball practice. And Bob Stevens went down and said,
I think you ought to shoot some free throws. And I said, what for?
He says, have him shoot some free throws and come with me. So they went to the upstairs gym.
Second floor, and there's a net that was 16 feet from the ground. The freshman team was watching as Johnny Green was jumping up and grabbing that net.
And here's John Green jumping up and dunking a basketball 2 at a time over a volleyball cable, 12 feet over the floor.
That wire had to be, I'd say, 11 feet at least. And I was the only one that could jump up and touch the wires.
At which time I told Bob, I said, see what this guy needs. And that was my recruitment of Johnny Green.
Anderson made joke about how lucky he was with the most famous walk-on in MSU history. But afterwards, the development of Johnny Green was no laughing matter. It was something Anderson took very seriously.
Forty knew what he could do because what he could jump. But Forty, after practice, Forty would take him even up in the auxiliary gym at Jenison. And just the two of them, hour after hour after hour, working on moves, working on offensive moves, working on defensive moves. And Forty was really the one, I think John will tell you, that made, Johnny the player that he is today. Forty realized the potential, but he also realized that Johnny had so much to learn of just the basics of playing basketball.
Not long after that, John Green became the most dominant defensive presence of his time. In just 2.5 years of action, Jumpin' Johnny grabbed 1,036 rebounds, and his average of 16.4 boards per game ranks second all-time in the Big Ten Conference.
John Green was one of the all-time success stories. Took a Michigan State team which was going nowhere and led it to the Final Four. His rebounding totals per game will never be matched. For him to grab 25 rebounds in a game was not at all uncommon.
We had an all-star game back against the varsity. I remember playing against Johnny Green and Horace Walker. But I remember John in particular. I dribbled behind my back and I went in for layup, and he was in the corner when I started, and I saw him. I said just instinctively, he'll never get to this one. Well, to my surprise, it ended up in the bleachers.
An All-American and Big Ten MVP in 1959, Green's nose for the boards took Michigan State basketball to heights it had never before reached.
Unbelievable. You cannot believe how he changed the game. Even our defense, we funneled everything in there, and they tried to get a shot off of Green, and he just knocked it away. And the student body went wild, and it was a whole new ball game for us.
Ironically, though he was known for his sky-high leaping ability, Green had his most difficult time jumping into the Spartans lineup. He was ineligible until January of 1957, and even then it wasn't an easy fit. With Green on the team, the Spartans lost their first 4 conference games that season. It wasn't the best of times.
It took a while before, we were able to really get it together. But I remember the very first game, I don't recall even now who we played, but, we looked very bad, and the team was kind of in turmoil, and some of the players was upset and everything because, I'm a new player coming in, taking the place of another player that they had gotten used to playing. So it did create a kind of a situation.
It didn't help that his first game came against Michigan, a team the Spartans had beaten 5 straight times. MSU lost that game, 70-69, to drop to 0-2 in the Big Ten. It took 2 more games and 2 more losses for the Spartans to turn their season around. After that, Michigan State won 9 straight games and was 1 win away from capturing the first conference championship in the school's history. In the way of the Spartans' dreams of a title were the Indiana Hoosiers. While outside the arena, in the way of Spartan fans wishing to see the big game, were the weather and a limited number of tickets. Everything was on the line, and the fans knew it. Despite Mother Nature's horrific conditions, people started lining up at noon for the 8 o'clock tip-off. All were there for the off chance that they might be able to grab a ticket to what at that time was the most important game in Michigan State history. Not too many fans were successful, but then again, not too many seemed to care.
Whoever wins this game represent the Big Ten and NCAA. And of course, we played Indiana, and we were at Jennison Fieldhouse. It was a home game for us. And, you know, we were so surprised because the weather was, as you say, blizzard conditions. Wind was blowing and like a snowstorm, and we was not aware of it, as players, because we were on the floor playing. But, there were 2,000 people that was lined up outside, couldn't get into the game. And they were out there. I guess they could hear on the microphone what was happening, but they stayed out there through the whole game, and they had to be talking about conditions less than 20 degrees.
2 halves later, Michigan State had beaten Indiana by 15 points. And the sight outside Jennison was no match for the chaos inside the arena once the last seconds ticked off the clock. Albeit a co-championship, a title was a title, and the Spartan fans were ready for a celebration.
The student body just ran on the floor, just like they did when the Spartans won, their Big Ten recently. They ran on the floor, and they picked up some of the players and put them on their shoulders and carried them off the floor. And, it was so much excitement. And even as I think about it now, it brings a smile to my face because, I remember how, it was such a great feeling, tremendous feeling.
The Spartans went on to play in the school's very first NCAA tournament, where they registered one of the most remarkable wins the program had seen up to that point. Number 3 Kentucky, on the road, without Johnny Green for the last 8 minutes of the game. If MSU was to make it to its first Final Four, it would need great play and a lot of luck. It got both. MSU stunned the Wildcats 80-68. And according to 40 Anderson, his Spartans were the best team in the nation that season. And it was this team that brought basketball out of the shadows and ingrained it into the hearts of all those who bled green and white.
We actually should have won it, but we lost in a 3 overtime game to North Carolina. But we got there. That was the most important thing. And the student body was just fantastic, and they've been fantastic ever since.